Thank you.
All right. Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much for inviting me to tell a story. I will try not to get too close to the mic and make that thing happen. If I stand here, can you hear me just fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so in 1968, my father was drafted and sent to the bloodiest year of the Vietnam War. 1968 was the year of the Tet Offensive, and 17,000 American troops died, 820,000 American troops were wounded, and that's not even, of course, touching on the untold numbers of Vietnamese casualties. In 1969, without explaining himself to anyone, he volunteered for a second tour. He came back and never liked fireworks again or the color green. And for a long time, that was all he really said about it. My father didn't really talk about anything. In fact, the only time he ever actually referenced the Vietnam War was the time that he told me that he was still carrying around a pound of lead in his ass cheek. However, I come from a family of women who tell stories in the kitchen, and so as a small child I got to eavesdrop and gather information. I learned that his platoon had been decimated, that he had received 3 Purple Hearts for being wounded in battle, and that when he had gone to the war, he was a gregarious, happy-go-lucky young man. And when I knew him, he was a very, very quiet man who really only liked to watch golf on television and drink icehouse beer. So, and really, you know, my father just really wasn't in my life as a kid. I think I saw him 6 times from birth to adulthood. And I didn't think much of it because where I come from, there really aren't that many fathers, to be honest. And so, fast forward to my early 30s, I wrote a book about my mom and having a single mother and all the craziness we went through, going to 14 different schools in 12 years, and just lots of adventures and all of that. And many of my early readers would ask me, what about the father? What, you know, isn't there a dad here? And it really sort of perplexed me, this question, because it just seems so run-of-the-mill to not really have a dad in my life. The kids I grew up with, you know, dads were terrors or drunks or perverts or all 3. And, you know, that was just the thing. And so when people started asking me that, it opened up a door for me. And you know, my father and I really didn't speak for most of my adulthood. We were estranged for lots of years. He was very, he was haunted by his war. And, you know, that had always been a thing between us. It was the neon light that sort of illuminated our relationship. The Vietnam War in neon letters in the room with us at all times without talking about it. And so I didn't feel like I could really talk to him. And so instead I went to my favorite thing, which is books. I read every book about the Vietnam War. I read The Quiet American by Graham Greene, which when American troops were deployed to Vietnam, that was literally the only novel that had ever been written in English about Vietnam, so everybody took a copy with them. And it has nothing, of course, it's about the French occupation of Vietnam. My husband gladly watched Platoon and Apocalypse Now and The Deer Hunter and Good Morning Vietnam and all the movies that have been made about the war. And then I started talking to other children of Vietnam vets, and I started gathering these stories and realizing there were no answers that were coming to me, only more questions. So that is how I decided that I needed to travel to Vietnam alone for an extended period of time, which in retrospect feels very naive. I thought that I would go, that I would stand on the ground my father had bled into, and I would get answers as to why he wasn't in my life. And that didn't happen. Just spoiler alert. Vietnam, talk about acceptance. Vietnam has built a fucking bridge and gotten over it. They've filled their bomb holes with fish farms, and they've planted jackfruit and passion flowers. And in Saigon, it's a teeming city of 9 million people, where people are in constant motion, and motorbikes and cyclos and bicycles, and just a river of people all the time. And any sign of the war or my father was buried under about 1 billion pairs of flip-flops and cafe sodas and tourist dollars. And there's a big commodity build-up around the war. You can go and they've widened the tunnels so that fat Americans can fit in them. And you can crawl through and you can, for $1, shoot off an AK-47. But that's not really what I was looking for in my answer seeking. So I decided to go deep into the countryside and on buses and boats, and I was still alone, and I got really sick. I had a pretty intense case of dysentery. I'd never heard of dysentery besides playing the Oregon Trail as a kid. But I got a very familiar and up-close sort of quick lesson on what dysentery is. I was robbed, I was lost, it was 100 degrees with 100% humidity. I would be in the jungle on a boat with someone who we didn't speak any of the same words. Vietnamese was impenetrable to me. I tried really hard. Flies would be aggressively trying to get into my mouth at all times. Like little crowbars, And at one point I was squatting over a latrine, emptying my guts out into the earth, and my passport fell out of my purse and into the shit. And still I was searching for these answers after I rinsed my passport off. And they weren't coming. There were no answers. But one day, I was in the Mekong Delta, I was walking down a path, and I had this fleeting moment where I felt as if it may have been the dysentery, but I felt as if I could feel him in my body. I could feel his arms and his legs and his head turning, and there were rice paddies, and it was fucking hot, and I could feel his guts falling out of his body, and I just had this moment, and then it was gone, and then the next moment I knew that I was as close, maybe, as I would ever get, and then I would never get close. So I came home, and people were like, "How's your trip?" And I couldn't answer. And then about a month later, I was on a social media website called Facebook, and I got a message pop up from my sister, who is my father's daughter as well, and it just said, "Our dad is dead." And 46 years after almost to the day that he was deployed in Vietnam, he killed himself. And in that moment, I was so grateful that I had gone to Vietnam, because I knew, just instantly knew, that however irretrievable his healing was, mine is not. And I can plant passion flowers and jackfruit, and I can fill my own bomb holes with fish farms. And so that's what I'm doing. So, thanks.